Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dr. Schwartz and Mr. Power, your subarctic source for strength, nutrition, and fitness information. I'm your host, the guy with the most on-the-nose name in strength training, Alex Power. Here with me is my co-host, colleague, friend, and always glamorous, Dr. Alex Schwartz. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. The weather's crisp. It's getting colder, and it's not becoming terrible for me. How about you?
Oh, it's good. It snowed here last night. That's kind of fun. If you're into that sort of thing. All right. So today we're going to discuss the Enhanced Games. So for those who don't know, the Enhanced Games is a sporting event / business venture whose elevator pitch is to allow athletes to use performance enhancing drugs, including anabolic-androgenic steroids. So founded by Australian business guy, Aaron D'Souza. Aaron spelled A-R-O-N. So a piece of me wonders that it's actually pronounced Aaron, but I don't know.
As in a single Games, Ron.
Yeah, Aaron D'Souza. So anyway, the Enhanced Games claims it will be redefining superhumanity through science, innovation, and sports. Needless to say, the proposal has stirred up controversy, condemnation, and a few right-ons. So instead of arguing the ethics of the games, we're going to take a slightly different tack. That is, this is cynical, boring, won't really bring anything new to the table. That's just our take. So let's get started. All right. So background on this. What's the premise of the games? When I first heard about this, it was, I heard something about it being billed as the drug Olympics or the untested Olympics. They seem to have adjusted their branding and messaging a little bit. And now it seems to be about this quote that I gave before, which is pulled right from their website. And that's the redefining superhumanity through science, innovation, and sport. So let's ignore that this sounds like the introduction to a pamphlet on eugenics for a second. And then we'll sort of get into the argument. But first, why are we talking about this now? Canadian weightlifter Bodhi Santabi, it was announced that he would be the first weightlifter and the first Canadian athlete recruited by the Enhanced Games, followed shortly after by Canadian weightlifter Wes Kitts. Well, Alex, you and I are both involved in Canadian weightlifting, both as former athletes. Me as a head coach for Young Life Weightlifting Club, you as a board member for the Territorial Sports Org for weightlifting. This popped up on our radar pretty quickly. It was all the chatter inside Canadian weightlifting. Bodhi is two-time Olympian, having competed in the 2000 Olympics in Tokyo and the 2024 Olympics in Paris, where he bombed out. But perhaps he's better known for his 2019 conviction for leaving the scene of an accident after running over a pedestrian. So needless to say, Bodhi seems committed to a life that's been ripped from the headlines. Okay, so moving on and coming back to superhumanity. So what they seem to be saying, in my view, is that, they're going to be applying science in never before attempted ways to make people super duper at sports. This can mean a few things, but mostly I think it's just a distraction, and I think we can call it out and then ignore it. Here's a quote from the site. Scientific and technological advances can be safely applied to sport. Their use should be embraced and celebrated in elite competition. So, what does that make you think of? Like, technological advances.
It makes me think of robots. A robot's going to be battling. Yeah. That's kind of where my mind goes.
Robots?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd be into
Interesting. Well, now we have a new a counter pitch to make to the VCs that are backing this endeavor. But I mean, it seems to be, an attempt to say, they're going to use science, right? And I guess my first thing I think of is that, well, sports already do this. There's nothing new here, right? Like, whether it's professional sports or high-level amateur sports, and athletes are already making use of, the latest in physiology and medicine, rehabilitation, biomechanics, even engineering and equipment design. So this is being done. This isn't
There's
actually anything
science
new.
degrees that are based off of sports. like sports
sports
science
science.
degrees,
Exactly.
human kinetics. Yeah,
Yeah.
this
I
isn't
mean,
new.
all the ones I
Yeah,
need, right?
yeah.
Physiology, biomechanics. So yeah, this is, I think, this is, I don't know, a red herring, I guess.
Hmm.
So there, and there's no, there's no secret science that they have access to that everyone else doesn't already have access to or isn't making use of, right? There's no, they have no monopoly on anything that anyone else couldn't use. Uh, so I think with that out of the way, we can just sort of dismiss the illusion that we're talking about anything here, but performance enhancing drugs. And that is, I mean, that's their big pitch in my view. And pretending otherwise is, treating the audience like they're stupid. And I don't think they are.
Right.
And so I guess on the tail of this, or, in response to this, again, on their website, right on the landing page, I think in an attempt to assuage, critics' concerns for athlete safety, they have a little quote and it says, "Protecting athletes is our top priority. Every competitor will undergo rigorous state-of-the-art medical profiling before participating in the competition." And I guess my thought there is, sure, I guess. I don't know. Again, I don't know what
Are they?
secret sauce they're go ahead.
I mean, are they going to just test the athletes to make sure they're on drugs? If they're
I don't
not
know.
on drugs, they get kicked out. Is it like
That's the actual criteria. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, again, there's nothing, what would they test? Like your blood pressure, check for heart arrhythmias. I mean,
they tap your knee?
yeah, these are young
Yeah.
athletic people, even on
Yeah.
drugs. They're mostly going to register as healthy. Again, unless they're, and I assume they are monitoring some, uh, markers of, impending doom associated with drug use, like very high hematocrit levels. In the case of using EPO, a drug that boosts hematocrit, which for those who don't know is red blood cell count. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So don't worry if you're not really sure what we're talking about.
Sludge
Um,
blood is what they're testing
yeah,
for.
basically.
Yeah.
So really thick blood, which as it
Hmm.
happens is not good.
Nope.
So yeah, so if they are actually monitoring these things, it might actually curtail some of this super duper performance that they're actually setting out to achieve. So maybe not being the free for all super event people are hoping for. But I think this gets at what's a major problem with this, and that's that a lot of the risks posed, or the potential dangers associated with drug use, are a direct result of the intended effect, right? So in the case of stimulants, you want to excite the nervous system. This, really leads to shorter reaction times or to, faster muscle contractions potentially. But, it also causes heart arrhythmias, which can be potentially disastrous. In the case of some stimulants like beta 2 adrenergic agonists, which the name doesn't matter, but they're associated with heart hypertrophy, so abnormal heart growth, which is again not good. Um, EPO, so this is a hormone, erythropoietin, that your body produces, and it causes you to produce more red blood cells. So the idea here is that you can carry more oxygen. So in an endurance event or even sort of a mid endurance event, something where you're repeatedly exerting yourself hard, you can breathe more easily, essentially, and take in more oxygen. Um, but this also, comes along with an increased risk of blood clots, strokes, deep vein thrombosis, cardiac arrest. So, non-trivial risk associated with that. And then, of course, everyone's favorite, and I think the drug that, or the class of drugs that always comes to mind when, people talk about drugs in sports is anabolic androgenic steroids. This, class of drugs is a pretty big group, and strictly speaking, you wouldn't just say steroids, but I might slip into doing that. So if I do in this, during the podcast, I hope the listener will give me the benefit of the doubt and recognize that I do know the difference. But in the vernacular, day to day, people just say steroids, and they're referring to, the male hormone testosterone and its synthetic derivatives, which we lump together as anabolic androgenic steroids.
We may also
So
slip
again,
into gear and sauce. Yeah.
gear and sauce. Yes, we
Yeah.
might use the super vernacular of
Yeah.
gear and sauce. Um, so again, I guess the effective monitoring and intervention, which if they do, I suspect is more with liability in mind than health, will, reduce the super duper nature of this event that people are hoping for. So it won't be like a complete free for all, which we'll come back to later and why this will actually make this event, or I guess exhibition or league. I don't know. They're calling it games, but whatever. Make it somewhat anticlimactic, I think.
Hmm.
So I guess that brings us to our question, which is this going to be offering up anything new, or, will it teach us anything about, the limits of human performance? Is there anything super sciencey to this event? Are they going to unleash untold levels of human performance? And even if they did, would we care? Would it make for a better viewing experience at all? Um, so to get to that and why, we landed on the answer being no, not really, we have to do a bit of a history lesson. And, in researching this and going through it, I thought of, some quotes that I'd heard before about history. And I'm not going to pretend I knew these off the top of my head, but I've heard them. And one is from George Hegel. The only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. So, I find that a little bit cynical, and I like to think that our audience is clever and friendly and attractive and, all sorts of good stuff. So I'm going to go with a different quote, and this is
It's
by George
pandering. I
Santayana.
respect that.
I got a pander, man.
Yeah.
We need the fans. We need the likes. 5 out of 5 stars, everybody.
Yeah.
We need it.
Just beautiful fans that we have.
Yeah, share it with your friends who are also beautiful.
Yeah.
So George Santayana said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think that's actually really apt in this case. And I think most of our listeners will see that as, we go through it. But the funny thing about this is that a lot of this stuff is barely history at all. Like, we've repeated this sort of a cycle with doping in sports over and over, right up until like less than a decade ago. So with that, let's get into the history. I guess to start, I'd say, it's good to point out, or it's helpful to point out, doping hasn't always been considered cheating. And, I think it was explicitly in the Tour de France in the 1930s and 1940s, this was just considered, how you would go about it. It was a valid approach to improving your performance. But things are cheating once you say they are, right? And I think that's a good way to just frame it. These are events, they're arbitrary. We made them up. We decided no drugs. And so that makes it cheating. And I think that gets around a lot of sort of the moralizing about, well, are drugs really good or bad? Well, we just said they're not allowed, so they're not. I think where it gets a bit more complicated is when, you've got a situation where there's a tacit acceptance of doping, in contravention to the official rules. And this sort of historic tacit acceptance is something that I think should be kept in mind, and, helps us predict why the games are going to be a bit of a letdown. So going back to 1935, testosterone, the male sex hormone that, makes men archetypically manly. So it's the hormone primarily responsible for, the higher proportion of muscular or of muscle on men versus women, as well as other things like, increased lung capacity, increased heart size, the relative broadening of the shoulders, the thickening and broadening of the skeleton, and just all the things that make men bigger and stronger on average.
He won a Nobel
So,
Prize.
Yeah, no, that's true, actually.
Adolf
Because
Butenandt. And he had to
right.
deny that Nobel Prize, in fact, because the government at the time in the 30s in Germany had a thing against the rest of the world. But later
Yeah,
they retroactively gave it to him.
They were troubling in familiar times.
Yes.
All right.
Indeed.
So then, this was clinically significant, right? Because there's whether, in eugonadal or, men with low testosterone levels, this is a potentially important therapeutic, discovery or advancement. as well as, the potential to use this in other clinical applications, as today, it's used sometimes for burn victims because it can accelerate healing. The problem is it didn't
Mhm.
work very easily or well, and that's because testosterone has a very short half-life in the body. It's broken down quickly into its metabolites, so the things that the liver breaks it down into. Um, and so scientists set about trying to find ways to modify it. First, just to make a version of testosterone that would hang around the body for longer. And the obvious thing here is if you have to inject someone several times a day, it's not clinically, a very useful thing because it's just not practical, right? So they wanted something that they could give to people less frequently, and even better, something that they could give to people orally or in a pill, because originally testosterone has to be injected because if you ingest it, it just gets broken down by the liver and it doesn't do anything. Um, so,
I
by
believe it was
the
Dianabol that was the first one
yeah,
Americans have come up with. Yeah.
yeah, the first synthetic testosterone derivative was Dianabol, which I don't remember the chemical name for. So Dianabol is the trade name, and that was John Ziegler, I think, was
Yeah,
the scientist who
Ziegler.
developed that.
He was the coach,
Um,
weightlifting coach for the U.S. team as well, I believe. And them and the Soviet
yeah,
Union
so
were pretty, yeah, friendly
yeah,
with competition. Yeah.
he was involved with USA weightlifting or whatever they were called at the time, and York barbell. But yeah, so in the 50s and 60s, uh, a whole bunch of variants of testosterone or synthetic testosterone derivatives were developed. And organic chemists, this is pretty easy work for them. You just basically add a bunch of different groups to it, and then you test them, see what they do. And so what's interesting is that not much has really been done on anabolic or steroid development since, right? So one of the goals, as we discussed, or two of the goals, were to make this something that would last longer when injected, or that you could take orally, like just a pill, because both of those are easier from a clinical perspective. There was also this thinking at the time that you could separate out the anabolic effects, so the muscle building effects, from the androgenic effects, which are
Hmm.
androgen comes from, andro, which means man. So the masculinizing effects. So, body hair growth, deepening of the voice, um, these things that, again, you think of as not strictly or, somewhat discrete. It turns out that that's not possible and that these are actually effects that are mediated downstream from the drug, and there's no disentangling them or no divorcing those effects. So they abandoned that. But let's keep in mind that there really hasn't been much of any new androgens developed since the 60s. It's just the same old drugs. They're just sitting around, mostly not getting used because they're mostly clinically not very important, other than, some are used for, burn or cancer victims, or to replace testosterone in men who aren't producing sufficient amounts for whatever reason, yada, yada. All right. So by the 1970s, this is starting to become a big thing in sports. Dianabol is referred to as the breakfast of champions. It's,
I thought that was
being given
Wheaties.
to, it's also a book by Kurt Vonnegut. But anyway,
Ah, right.
yeah. So 1970s, people are starting to get concerned. The health implications of this or the side effects are becoming more apparent. And in the sporting world, they're starting to talk about, testing in amateur sports. Um, so the testing method that they come up with is gas chromatography, which is an analytical technique. So basically they take a urine sample and you vaporize it. You can tell what's in it. We won't get into that. It's way too technical and I don't remember that well from organic chemistry class. And it doesn't actually matter. But what is important is that this was pretty rudimentary at the time, right? The sample handling was rudimentary, and the actual chromatography itself was early stages compared to what we would consider modern techniques. And all they could really detect was, the parent compound that was either injected or ingested, and even then only for a short amount of time. So once your body started metabolizing these drugs, they were rendered more or less undetectable. But it did mean that athletes had to, stop using these drugs within a couple weeks of competition. So, that's not that long. And most of the effects of these drugs would still be apparent, 2 weeks after taking them, especially if you've been taking them for a while. So likely had little, if any, effect on performance. And we can consider athletes, I think, pretty safely who, stop drug use 2 weeks before a competition as being on those drugs for all intents and purposes. Okay, so moving on past the 80s, we're getting, or the 70s, moving into the 80s, there was a bunch of things that, were happening, especially as the build up towards the 1988 Summer Olympics, which are a real turning point in drug testing and the public's view and awareness of doping in sports. So, of course, as Canadians, we remember this better, but so Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson tested positive for anabolic steroids during or after the 1988 final heat, where he broke the world record running 100 meters in 9.76 seconds. This is a big deal, not least of which because of the high-profile rivalry with American sprinter Carl Lewis. And it's a sexy event leading up to the Olympics. 100-meter, he broke a world record. He won the gold. I think it was like the next day they stripped him of his medal.
Yeah.
And it was certainly in Canada, all over the news. And so the reason this happened, because drug testing wasn't a new idea at the time, was during the 80s. There were a bunch of advancements in drug testing, right? And so you had the coupling of mass spectrometry with gas chromatography, which, analytic chemistry nerds refer to as the abbreviation age, because, they start stacking these techniques, and, you have NSGC testing, and, the testing was getting better. Again, still not to modern standards, but what ends up happening is you're pushing out the amount of time athletes need to stop taking drugs in order to pass, drug tests. So, at the same time, at the same Olympics, there were a bunch of other people who got popped on the drug test too, because they weren't prepared for, the new improved testing regime, including 4 Canadian weightlifters, among them Jacques Demers, who's another funny story. I don't know if we'll get to him, but he's another guy who can't seem to just, have his life be ripped from the headlines.
The interesting thing about that race with Ben Johnson is that I believe most of the sprinters over the next few years ended up testing positive for drug testing in that finals race.
Yeah, there were a bunch. Some are, I think, more noteworthy than others. Like Carl Lewis tested positive for a stimulant.
Ephedrine, yeah.
Yeah, they were able to trace it back to something he took. They didn't realize had ephedrine in it. And honestly, I don't see ephedrine making a meaningful difference anyway, even if he did take it on purpose. Of course, Ben Johnson's teammates were in the final heat. I can't remember their names, but they both ended up testing positive. Or if they didn't, it came out in the Dubin Inquiries, which we'll talk about in a sec. Linford Christie at some point tested positive. Anyway, so it was the times, right? And I think that's important, and the picture we're painting.
It's the 80s.
Yeah. So there was an inquiry in Canada led by Justice Charles Dubin. So for our non-Canadian listeners, a justice is what we call a judge. And so they did this public inquiry, and he, interviewed all these athletes and officials, among whom was Charlie Francis, Ben Johnson's coach, which to his credit was, very, I guess, straightforward about what was going on. I think, he got caught and he's like, all right, this is what's happening. And it was, I think, pretty clear they were going to make him the sacrificial lamb, and he just let it all out. So the report itself, which I read years ago, probably like around 1999 or something, it's pretty good reading. There's a version with all the transcripts and everything, and then there's a version which is just the report on the inquiry, and it's pretty entertaining because they go into just sort of all the things leading up, like aforementioned Canadian weightlifter Jacques Demers trying to catheterize himself before the drug test, but he couldn't hold his pee. And then anyway, it's
It's
interesting
good
reading.
stuff.
Also, again, that tacit recognition in certainly Canadian sports and, a number of other countries that doping was occurring and it was just how it was done. Even though, it was against the rules. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't, but, it was widely accepted that in order to be competitive, this is what you had to do. Similarly, Charlie Francis wrote a book or co-authored a book with a ghostwriter called Speed Trap, where he sort of lays out what he did and, his story of how he ended up as this, pariah of track and field. So, this led to a big fallout after 1988 in amateur sports, where all of a sudden, people were very concerned about doping. And you see an almost immediate drop in results in sports that you would most expect to see results drop if they were, using, in particular, steroids. So weightlifting results, like precipitous drop almost immediately. Sprinting results, same thing, rapid drop in average times. And then, hammer throw, that's a track and field one. Alex, maybe you can tell us, when was the hammer throw world record that still stands today set?
It was 1986.
Okay, so, make that out what you will. That was Yuri Siddiq, right?
It was,
okay,
it was 86 meters and 74 centimeters.
Right. So, so that's, coming up on 40 years. No one's broken the record yet. So it's, I know he never tested positive, but I think it's instructive. So speaking of Russia.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I do have insights into that.
I mean, we have a number of insights into athletes from people talking to us that might not appreciate us just blurting it out on a podcast.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. No,
we're not those guys. All right. So Soviet Union, for those of you who don't remember, that was a thing. Look it up. So GDR, German Democratic Republic, people are less likely to know that that's actually the correct name for what's often referred to as East Germany. So it was widely recognized that there was, widespread doping. Charlie Francis, in his book Speed Trap, details his interactions with, in particular, coaches from the GDR. But in 1993, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, documents and subsequent criminal trials in East Germany, or the GDR, made records available showing a wide-scale state-sponsored doping program, which was just like massive. There's probably nothing comparable. So the GDR doped their athletes as a matter of policy starting in 1974. So thousands of athletes were given performance-enhancing drugs without their consent. Doping started in young athletes at sports schools. And with doping continuing on into adulthood. As a result, the GDR dominated track and field through, the late 70s through the mid 80s. Actually, initially they were using testosterone esters, and then they switched to an oral steroid. Actually, it was injectable, Turinabol, which had a short half-life and less of certain types of side effects. And this is actually where Charlie Francis got some guidance for drug use with Ben Johnson. But anyway, so
but he got one of Charlie Francis's arguments was that they popped Ben Johnson for something that he wasn't taking, which I believe they said he was taking stenozolol or something like that.
Yeah, so they said he was, he tested positive for stenozolol, and Charlie Francis said that's not what he was taking. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like it's, I don't think that's like, maybe he got something he didn't think he got. Who knows? I mean, I don't know. People point to that, but there's no doubt about the drug use. I mean, both Ben Johnson and Charlie Francis eventually are quite upfront about that. And so, what the drug was doesn't really matter, in my view. Going back to GDR, like I'd like to point out, like, just so people are clearly, this is actually a terrible story, which I'm giving very short shrift, right? These were kids, including girls, that were given hormones without their consent, starting at a young age, like early pubescence. This wasn't like, an adult male Joe Rogan fan who, wants a bigger neck to improve their BJJ performance, right? These are like little boys and girls. these are kids. And, for anyone not familiar with the effects of these drugs, they're non-trivial, right? So you have lifelong impacts of these drugs on both boys and girls, but girls in particular, you have, permanent changes like deepening of the boys, body hair growth, fertility disruptions, maybe sterility in some
Hmm.
cases, and, enlargement of the clitoris. Like, this is not like, it's not a small deal, right? Like, this is actually a really sad story. And if anyone wants to learn more about it, they can read a book by Stephen Ungerleider called Faust's Goal. We'll put a link in the show notes. Um, yeah,
Really
and it's
selling
sad.
it by calling it, yeah.
Yeah, but it's
Nice
also
job.
it's interesting. We should all know our history, right?
Yep.
Okay, so GDR, of course, just one country, and the Soviet Union comprised a whole bunch of countries. Um, most prominently Russia, which of course is I mean, they're the ones who took over all the other countries and said, you're now part of the USSR. So if, testing positive at the Olympics was an event, Russia would be the
They're the
all-time champ.
champs. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
they've had 51 Olympic medals stripped. So that's 4 times the number of this next highest country. 30% of the global total on record. And that's just
Hmm.
medals. Okay.
That's just
So
medals on record. Yeah.
it's just medals. So
Yeah.
for non-medals, like we throw all the positive drug tests, so include, whoever came in fourth, they've had 150 athletes who've been busted for doping. But yeah, so we're going to back up again to the 80s, but this time just looking at Russia. So again, for those who don't know the history or maybe a little younger, in 1980, the United States and a number of allied countries boycotted the Olympics in Moscow. And this was in response, it was a protest in response to, perhaps ironically, Russia's invasion of Afghanistan. Okay, so during these Olympics, documents that came out in the 2000s, it came to light that there was no doping control and that Russia, planned a big push on a state-sponsored doping program leading up to those Olympics. So at those Olympics,
Yeah.
it was only, sort of Russia-aligned or unaligned countries participating. USSR, quite predictably, cleaned up. I mean, and you can actually look up the results from that. And you'll know what untested, performance looks like. And it's more, but what's noteworthy is it's not like a crazy amount more. It's less than 10% more, on average. But everyone is a bit stronger, but maybe not what you might think. So then 4 years later, now the Olympics are in Los Angeles, right? 1984. In response to, the US and allies boycotting the 1980 Olympics, the Soviet Union boycotted the LA Olympics. And in their place, they held their own games, which they called the Friendship Games.
Friendship.
Friendship. Again, the Friendship Games was there was no doping control, not even 1984 style drug testing. And it was just, again, the results from events like weightlifting and a number of track and field events eclipsed the results from the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. Again,
and part of this was also to basically compare them to the 1984 Olympics because they wanted to show that, they were better. Like there was a whole nationalist aspect to it. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. That's the whole thing. I mean, that's why you boycott it, because you're making a statement, right? And then, you're saying, oh, ours, not only are we not participating in yours, but ours is better.
Yeah, they were actively doing it too.
Yeah, no. Certainly their willingness to, do whatever they needed to achieve a result was demonstrated. So more recently, Russia received a countrywide ban from WADA when it came to light that they were once again engaged in state-sponsored campaign to evade drug testing. And I won't go too much into this. This is actually like the documentation on this is too much of it, and it goes on with appeals and back and forth between Russia and WADA and the IOC. So very short shrift. Cole's Notes version. Too long, don't read. 2014, German broadcaster ARD ran an investigative documentary claiming state-sponsored doping of Russian athletes. In response, WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Organization, commissioned an investigation headed by Richard McLaren, another Canadian lawyer, into the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. This resulted in the McLaren Report. 2016, IOC announced the reanalysis of stored urine samples from 2008 and 2012. So this was a new thing at the time. So now they store urine samples so they can go back and retest them when techniques are improved or when they identify a new drug that, people have tried to get around testing with. Anyway, so there was a bunch of people who tested positive, a bunch of Russian athletes who have subsequently been stripped of their medals. There was a bunch of back and forth between, Russian officials, WADA, the IOC, RUSADA, which is the Russian arm of, or the Russian organization associated with WADA, responsible for doping control in Russia. So RUSADA was stripped of their accreditation. Athlete sample, and Russia was banned from participating in international sporting events, including the Olympics. Whew. Okay. So we've painted, I think, a pretty clear picture where doping in sports is nothing new, right? So you've already seen this show, whether you were aware of it or not. And, we could go on and on. I think we could probably actually start a sister podcast just on the history of doping, and we'd have material for a year. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we didn't get into here. The Tour de France, just rampant doping accusations, scandals, and since its inception, just very well documented if anyone's interested in that. The MLB doping scandal involving Balco Labs in the, early 2000s. Yeah.
Yep.
With the home run race or whatever it's called.
It's Save Baseball.
For a while. So now that we're all historians of doping in sports, all right. So back to our initial question, and that's, does the enhanced games bring us anything new? Does it answer a question we didn't already have an answer to? Does it teach us anything about super mega humanity or whatever? And to that, my vote is nah. What do you think?
No, absolutely not. I'm with you.
So we already know what drug-fueled or untested athletes look like. It looks like sports in the 80s, especially amateur sports, right? We know what weightlifting looks like. We know what sprinting looks like. And these are things that are benefited very directly from, drugs like steroids. And I guess to borrow the model from the Olympics, it'll be a bit faster, a bit stronger, a bit higher or whatever it is.
Swifter.
But it's not going to be huge, right? Especially if they don't have top level people, because I don't see either, for instance, Wes Kitts or Bodhi Sintavi setting any big records, even on drugs at this point. They're past their best before date. And, I just don't expect big things. Maybe I'll be wrong. So if we look at the results of, the Olympics in 1980, which we discussed, from 1984 and even 1988, we already know what this looks like. So I don't think they're going to bring anything new to the table. And their marketing pitch really relies on, people's, lack of knowledge or lack of memory, or, just being too young to recognize that, you've already seen this game. And it's not much different. It's not more exciting. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's going to add more to anything. I don't think it's going to add anything more to knowledge. And quite frankly, I think if anything, it's risky.
For sure.
I mean, what does it ultimately say about sport itself? Let's say they don't break any records. Does that say that the athletes are not that great, or is that telling us that the better athletes are taking drugs, or they're just that much better? It's not really going to answer any questions.
No, I mean, and that's a good point, right? Like, how would you even interpret any of the results anyway? I think in a way, what's interesting is that, historically, I feel like drugs in sports had really, held back our knowledge. They haven't taught us things. They've actually hidden things. And specifically looking at sports science in, strength and conditioning, um, drug use at high levels really masked what were often ludicrous training approaches. And for those familiar with weightlifting, the Bulgarian method comes to mind. For those not familiar with that, basically the Bulgarian weightlifting team under Ivan Adijev from sometime in the 70s up through the 80s just did maximum clean and jerks and snatches and squats every day, multiple times a day. And anyone who ever tried this, and it's claimed many victims, especially those of us who were around before the internet. When this was this had like a certain lore to it, right? And you weren't hardcore until you tried training this way. But frankly, it screws people up, and
I think I got sick and I couldn't sleep when
I just got hurt.
Yeah, it was just
I just wrecked my knees. And that's not, neither of those are particularly unique stories. So yeah, I think it's less than we'll learn. Not only will we not learn anything, but it'll has the potential to mask what are ultimately important questions for those of us interested in sports science. So yeah, I guess, and the next bit is, I argue that, watching people go a little faster, jump a little higher and lift a little heavier actually isn't what's entertaining about sports anyway. And this is something that I've realized more recently, right? So for instance, watching women's weightlifting, where in the lighter weight divisions, these are weights I can imagine. Some, lots of them are, there's weights I've lifted more than. But I don't find it any less entertaining to watch. And the most interesting sessions, the most exciting sessions, are when there's a close matchup, not necessarily when, someone's setting a world record or, is far ahead of the rest of the field. I actually find that often boring because it's, everyone else gets their turn. And then this one person comes out, just lifts on their own, that as long as they don't really screw up, they're going to win. And it's just, I don't know, it's just not that fun. I want to see people, duke it out, or, the photo finish in the 100 meters. Like that's what's interesting.
They're opening with your last weight, like, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not,
yeah.
It's
so yeah,
not
someone's
as exciting.
opener. Yeah. If someone's winning with their opener, it's like, okay. I mean, it's impressive, but as far as drama goes or things I want to watch, it's not nearly as interesting as, when you have these people going head to head, which is exciting. And I think that's what most people want out of sports. Like,
well, I mean,
historically,
the flip side of that was the steroid era of baseball, which everyone talks about. They put this asterisk on it. But if it was just a single athlete, and in this case, there was a single athlete later, Barry Bonds, it wasn't as interesting as when Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were going back to back trying to beat this old home run record from, I don't know, the 50s or something, when people were smoking cigarettes and drinking on the mound and throwing pitches behind their head. But it was one of these things where it was exciting. It was super exciting, and everyone was tuning in to see, it was Sammy Sosa going to match Mark McGwire. Mark McGwire hits 2 this game. Sammy Sosa hits 2, and they're just going back and forth. It effectively, like I said, it saved baseball. But Barry Bonds later actually broke both of their records from that year, and they were all inflated from when they were you look at their rookie cards. It's pretty funny. They're just ballooned up. They're all so much bigger.
The change in the shape of their face.
Oh, it's so funny. And like, you look at their rookie cards, and they were grown men by then too. They weren't children. But the excitement wasn't the actual drugs themselves. It was these 2 athletes who were surpassing everybody else, but they were going head to head on teams that weren't that
conflict,
great.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the conflict. Or again, going back to the 80s, and Ben Johnson and Carl Lewis, like the media made a lot of the conflict between these 2 guys, and that's what made it exciting. And that's, that was what was interesting. I mean, in my view, and you can look to women's sports. It's another example. So, since like the late 19th century, when professional sports was just starting to become what we think of as modern, professional and amateur sports, the argument that no one wanted to watch women because they were slower and smaller was already being trotted out.
Hmm.
And that continues on to today. But if you look at viewing numbers, it's clearly not true. These are very popular. People really enjoy watching women's sports. And yeah, the women are a bit smaller, they're a bit slower, and they're not quite as strong. But it doesn't matter, because what you're actually watching is, person A versus person B, or team A versus team B. And that conflict is what makes it interesting, not, that they, I don't know, like ran a little faster, or lifted a little more. It just, I don't know, my view, it just isn't.
Yeah, the numbers don't matter as much as the conflict. I agree completely.
Okay, so one final example. So if, let's say you had, or I would challenge someone. Let's say you had two videos. We'll take the 100 meters because it's easy to understand, right? So 100-meter race, you have two races, you show them to people. The first race, the average speed is, 10.7 seconds, so which is like a fast women's time, right? Like the top level women 100-meter sprint. Let's say that's the average speed. The winner runs 10.6. All right, good race. But you don't show the time. Show another race where everything is, a quarter second faster, which, to be clear, is actually a lot. That's a lot faster. Okay. So the average speed is a quarter second faster for the whole heat. And then, the winner is a quarter second faster. If you showed those videos someone back to back, you would not be able to tell the difference. I would actually challenge someone to say which race went faster. And I don't think, you could, as a spectator, watch those two races, unless sprinting's your life and you're a coach,
Yeah.
or you yourself are a top level sprinter. Even then, I have my doubts. I don't think people will be able to tell the difference. And so I don't think, I don't think that's really what drives entertainment in sports. But, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am in this case.
So why do you think it is that that sport is held to sort of the standard? And we have other aspects of life that where we've accepted drug use, and I off the top of my head, and they're kind of weird examples, but fighter pilots taking amphetamines, musicians taking beta blockers, competing for seats in orchestra positions, or even students taking amphetamines basically, but taking like
Like
Ritalin or anything
Ritalin
to help
or
cognition.
Adderall or something.
So why is it that we think with sport, or why do you think it is that with sport we sort of put it on this pedestal that we don't want to accept drug use with sport versus other parts of life?
I mean, I think there's a few things. I guess first I would challenge that everyone's okay with the examples you gave. I don't think everyone is okay with, especially when you turn it around and say, okay, well, your kid's taking Adderall that they got off, some guy at school, in order to boost their grades. And I think you might find that the uptake is actually, not the support's not necessarily there, or the indifference wouldn't be there if it was someone they knew. But like, I get your point. I think there's a few things. One is this idea of, the sanctity, I guess, of sport, and this pure battle of, two people who've just worked hard, um and we want to see what people are capable of. And I think the idea that if you're taking something, like a drug, that it's not you doing the work, it's the drug doing the work. um and you can sort of quibble over that, and at the end of the day, it's sort of an unanswerable question, like
Hmm.
what you consider cheating. The simplest answer is, if you say it's cheating, it's cheating, but that doesn't answer your question about why people care so much to make it cheating. And I think another part of it is the safety, and that's real. And that, people try to downplay that and say, oh, well, the safety profile of these things is better than people say. And it's like, well, we actually don't know what a lot of the safety profiles of these things are. We never will. Like, you're never going to get a study approved to look at, high doses of anabolic steroids in athletes to see if it's safe. Like, no one's going to approve that. No ethics committee is going to be like, yeah, let's just see what happens to these athletes. Like, that's
Let's just go
immediately, especially
nuts.
because we like right from the start have good reason to believe that there will be negative health effects, because we know what some of them are. So I think some of it is that too. And also, again, like a lot of us have kids and your kids are in sports. You don't want to think, okay, well,
Hmm.
the only way for my kid to compete and like as an actual competitor, not just, showing up, but to have a chance at winning something is by taking drugs that might, permanently affect some health markers. Like, I can understand why people have some trepidation about that. So, I think it's a bunch of things. I don't know. I don't know if that answers it.
No, I wasn't looking for a
Yeah.
concrete answer. I was curious on your take.
Yeah. No, it's, all right. Well, I mean, I guess we're running long on time here. I don't want to keep our
Hmm.
viewers, I'm sure they have other things to do other than listen to us, which, it's hard to believe in some ways, but I'm willing to accept it just in principle. So I guess one final thing. So what about Bodhi and Wes? Bodhi Sintagi, Wes Kits? I'm not expecting great things. I mean, I have to, I don't know if I'm rage baiting people or what, but I think both these guys are past their best before day. I don't think we're going to be like seeing great
Jeez.
things from their performance. And ultimately they won't answer this question of like, how much better will people be, if they're allowed to take some amount of steroids. I don't actually think it'll be a free for all. Um, if we caught either of them 8 years ago, maybe.
Maybe.
Um, but
They're
yeah,
just
they're
not
both.
top athletes. So, at best they might
Yeah,
be getting closer to the top athletes, which isn't very interesting.
no, and that's not what anyone wants to see. Like I said, they're
Yeah.
both good athletes. And 10 years ago, I think you would have seen what they could do on drugs. And I mean, again, we
Hmm.
already know the answer. More, a bit more, maybe like I don't know, 10%, give or take. Um, but I suppose we'll see. I've been wrong before, but I don't actually think it'll be that interesting. Not least of which because they don't seem to have a big competitive field there either. So it's just going to be like, what do you have? An exhibition? Like these two guys, they're sort of biggest names in weightlifting, aren't even close to the same weight division. So like, are just going to be
Yeah.
exhibition shows? You have a bunch of like, third rate D group athletes picking up the rear. Like, I don't know. Like both of them
Or
have
just a
been
bunch of
top,
Russians
or a
who
bunch, yeah,
can't
Russians
compete
who can't
anywhere
compete
else.
anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Maybe that's what it's going to be, right?
Hmm.
Um, all right. So let's wrap it up. Thanks everyone for listening. You can find us on YouTube at Praxis Strength and Nutrition, or you can find us at praxispn.com, PRAXISPN. We'll put a link in the show notes. If you're looking for online coaching or for strength conditioning or nutrition, fitness, whatever, drop us a line. I'd say give us a call. That didn't give you a phone number. Hope you liked this episode. Hope it was informative. And yeah, have a great night, everyone.
Take care.